Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy. Today we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 through 4. You probably recall that in yesterday's session we were looking at the end part of Deuteronomy chapter 26, the last paragraph, as a matter of fact, in chapter 26. You might wonder, well, why we're going back a couple of chapters today? Remember I said yesterday that as we concluded chapter 26, that concluded this large section of the book of Deuteronomy that we've been looking at for the last many number of sessions. That section includes chapters 12 through 26. And in this section, Moses is talking to the Israelites about how they will establish their community life when they come into possession of the promised land. Now we saw, as we made our way through all those chapters, that they include a wide variety of laws and regulations and instructions covering a wide variety of topics about this new community life in Israel. So we kind of wrapped up the section yesterday, but before we go on into the next section of Deuteronomy, beginning with chapter 27, I wanted to go back and look at two passages, one in chapter 24 and one in chapter 25, that we had not dealt with before. These two passages, or two paragraphs, are interesting to us because Jesus is asked questions about them in the New Testament. The two passages we're going to look at in the next few days, Jesus receives these questions. What do they mean and how do they apply for us today? And so I want to look at them and then look at how Jesus responded to the questions about them. And so the first one is in chapter 24, verses 1 through 4, where Moses gives some instructions about divorce and remarriage. Now let's read the 4 verses and talk just a little bit about them. Moses says, "If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house, and if after she leaves his house she becomes the wife of another man, and her second husband dislikes her and writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house, or if he dies, then her first husband, who divorced her, is not allowed to marry her again after she has been defiled. That would be detestable in the eyes of the Lord. Do not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance." So Moses gives some very specific instructions about divorce and remarriage, about one particular instance of divorce and remarriage. Now, it's clear from the passage that Moses recognized that divorces would occur in the life of Israel. That even though the idea of creation and the ideal for marriage is for a lifetime, because of the fact that we live in an imperfect world and we're dealing with broken people, and that brokenness sometimes affects marriages, unfortunately, divorces do occur. Moses recognizes this. He says, I know that there will be times of divorce, and I know you're going to have the question, can you remarry? But Moses in this passage is dealing with a very specific kind of remarriage. Notice these instructions are based on the if-then model. If this occurs, if this occurs, if this occurs, then this is the instruction you receive. So he says, if a man divorces his wife, if that occurs, and if she remarries, she marries someone else, and if her second marriage dissolves, that husband divorces her, or he dies, then she is not permitted to marry the first husband again. In other words, Moses understands that divorce sometimes occurs and that remarriage is permitted. Divorce can occur because of the brokenness of the world. We're not a perfect world. And there can be a second marriage. Remarriages can occur. What is not allowed, Moses says, this is the one prohibition he puts, is if the first marriage dissolves and you marry someone else, and that marriage dissolves, you're not permitted to remarry the first spouse. That is the one prohibition. And that's what this passage is all about. That one prohibition against remarriage to your first spouse after you've been married a second time. Now you might wonder, well, why is remarriage itself allowed, but not that kind of remarriage to your first spouse if you, in the intervening time, you've been married to someone else? Well, to be honest with you, we're not quite sure. It just says Moses says this was not right in the eyes of the Lord. It may have been that Moses foresaw a possibility where people might involve in wife swapping. You get married and you don't like them, so you marry somebody else, and you say, well, I'm divorced, then we'll go back to the first one. Moses didn't want marriage and divorce or remarriage to degenerate into some form of just wife swapping. And so the prohibition is against remarrying your first spouse after you've been married again to a second person. So that's what Deuteronomy 24 spelled out. Moses did allow for divorce. He saw that sometimes that brokenness would occur. He did allow for remarriage. He saw that. He just simply did not allow you to marry your first spouse again if you had married someone else before. You understand? So please understand what Deuteronomy 24 says and what it does not say. However, by Jesus' time, there had arisen a dispute about what Moses meant by indecent. In his first, if this occurs, he said, if someone divorces his wife because of some indecency. So by Jesus' day, the dispute had arisen. What does that mean, the indecency? What is Moses talking about? That's what the dispute was in Jesus' day. And that's what the question was about. And we're going to look at that tomorrow when they ask the question about what did Moses mean by indecency as a grounds for divorce. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. So I hope you join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy.